In Order to Live, A North Korean Girl's Journey to Freedom by Yeonmi Park. Picture this. It's just past midnight, and the cold air bites at your skin like 1,000 tiny needles. The only light comes from a sliver of moon hanging in an ink-black sky. You're 13 years old, scrambling down a steep, frozen riverbank. Somewhere above you, somewhere below you, soldiers wait with loaded guns and zero hesitation. You're not just breaking a rule here. You're committing what your country considers the ultimate betrayal. This isn't some Hollywood thriller. This was reality for a young girl named Yeonmi Park the night she fled North Korea. And here's the thing that breaks your heart. She wasn't chasing some lofty dream of freedom. She didn't even understand what that word really meant yet. She was running because the hunger in her belly had become so constant, so crushing, that she'd risk everything for something as simple as a bowl of rice. But what happens next? What happens when the world you thought would save you turns out to be another kind of nightmare, maybe even worse than the one you escaped? Today we're diving into a story that will absolutely haunt you. It comes from a book that's shaken readers worldwide, selling millions of copies and being translated into over 30 languages. It's Yeonmi Park's memoir, titled In Order to Live. And listen, this isn't just another escape from dictatorship story. This is about what happens to the human spirit when it's pushed past every imaginable limit. It's about what freedom actually costs, and the impossible choices people make just to survive another day. By the time we're done here, you're going to understand something most of us never have to face. What it's like to have your own thoughts policed, to reclaim your mind after a lifetime of lies, and to discover that sometimes the most powerful weapon against evil isn't force at all. It's one person telling their truth, no matter how painful. This journey gets dark. I won't sugarcoat that. But stick with me, because where we end up is something profound about what it means to be human. To really grasp Yeonmi's story, we need to step into the world she was born into. Imagine a place where even your thoughts aren't safe, where from the moment you can talk, you're taught that your leader is basically a god who can read minds. Think something bad, he'll know, and you'll pay. This was North Korea during Yeonmi's childhood. Her mother's constant warning wasn't about looking both ways before crossing the street. It was simpler and more terrifying. Be careful of your mouth. Even the birds and mice can hear you whisper. And she meant it literally. In their world, anyone could be a spy. Your neighbor, your teacher, even your own family might be forced to report on you. She grew up in Hyesan, a border city right next to China. At night, she'd stand in her powerless, dark city and stare across the Yalu River at the glittering lights of Changbai on the Chinese side. It might as well have been another galaxy. The fireworks during Chinese New Year looked like magic. Sometimes, when the wind blew just right, she could smell food drifting across the water. Oily noodles. Dumplings. Scents from a world she couldn't imagine, because in her world, hunger was just normal. The worship of the Kim family was absolute and all-consuming. Kim Il-sung was the, quote, great leader. His son, Kim Jong-il, was the dear leader, and their portraits hung everywhere. Their mythology was woven into every single aspect of life. Even math problems were twisted into propaganda. A typical question might be, if you kill one American bastard, and your comrade kills two, how many dead American bastards do you have? The hatred for America, for the Yankee Devils, was drilled into them from day one. And young Yeonmi? She believed it all completely. She truly believed Kim Jong-il could control the weather with his mind. She once dreamed that the dear leader hugged her and gave her candy, and when she woke up, she was filled with such pure joy it became one of her happiest childhood memories. That's not just political control, That's what former insiders have called an emotional dictatorship. They don't just want your obedience. They want your heart, your feelings, your very soul. But here's where it gets weird. There's this phenomenon that happens in places like this. Something George Orwell called doublethink. It's holding two completely opposite ideas in your mind at the same time, and somehow believing both. You're taught you live in the greatest paradise on earth, where children are treasured above all, and you believe it. But on your way home from school, you walk past the bodies of starving children abandoned in the street, their bellies swollen. You see these things, but you can't really process them. Seeing bodies floating in the river becomes normal. Stepping over a stranger crying for help becomes normal. Because to feel compassion would mean acknowledging the lie. And acknowledging the lie could get your entire family killed. Yeonmi's family wasn't always among the poorest. Her father, Park Jin-sik, was clever and resourceful, a member of the ruling Workers' Party. She thinks if he'd been born in a capitalist country, he would have been a millionaire. But in North Korea, private business was illegal. So her father became a black market trader, an outlaw. He smuggled anything he could get his hands on: cigarettes, sugar, eventually precious metals. It was dangerous, built on bribes and constant fear. But for a while, it kept their family afloat. They had rice, sometimes even meat. They even had a Nintendo game console, a black market treasure that brought rare moments of joy to their small, drafty home. But that prosperity was fragile, built on sand. In the 1990s, after the Soviet Union collapsed, North Korea's economy imploded. The state food distribution system just stopped. This was the beginning of the Great Famine, what the regime euphemistically called the Arduous March. As many as 1 million people starved to death. This collapse gave birth to what's now called the Jungmadung generation. Jungmaduns are the black markets that sprouted out of sheer desperation. Suddenly, everyone had to become a trader just to survive. And here's the thing. This created a crack in the regime's total control. Along with smuggled food and clothes came something far more dangerous: information. Illegal foreign movies, mostly pirated DVDs from China, began circulating in the shadows. For Yeonmi, watching these films was like opening a window onto another universe. She saw Cinderella. She saw James Bond. But the film that changed everything was Titanic. It wasn't just the technology of a ship from 1912 that stunned her. It was the story itself. She was amazed that someone would make a movie about love, about two people willing to die for each other. Not for the regime, for a feeling. The idea that people could choose their own destinies, that was a revelation, her first tiny taste of freedom. But this glimpse couldn't save her family. Her father's illegal business, which had kept them alive, became their destruction. In 2002, he was arrested in Pyongyang for smuggling metals. This was catastrophic. In North Korea, when one person commits a crime, the entire family is branded criminal. Their status, their songbun, which determines everything from where you live to what job you can have, was destroyed. Yeonmi was just 9 when her father was taken. Her mother, Keum-suk, was left to care for her and her older sister Yeonmi, with no money and no hope. The darkest period of their lives began. They were often left alone for weeks while their mother traveled, trying to earn a few won or bribe guards for information. Yeonmi and Yeonmi had to learn to survive on their own. They learned to chop wood, to break ice on the river to wash clothes. Hunger became their constant companion again. They roamed nearby hills, eating wild plants, insects, even dragonflies. Spring, which everywhere else means life and renewal, was the season of death in North Korea, the time when food reserves ran out and bodies piled up. Her father was eventually released after 3 years, but not because he was free. He'd bribed a warden. And he came back a broken man. The vibrant, funny, irreverent person she remembered was gone, replaced by a ghost with a shaved head and a spirit crushed by torture and starvation. He was too sick to work, and his presence only put the family in more danger. By early 2007, the family was at a breaking point. No food, no money, no future. Her father was dying. Her mother was a fugitive for living outside her registered district. Those lights of China, twinkling just across the river, no longer seemed like a distant dream. They seemed like the only hope. Rumors circulated that teenage girls could find work in China. It was a whisper of a chance. Yeonmi, now 16, was desperate. One night in late March, she told her mother and Yeonmi, who was recovering from surgery, that she'd found a broker and was leaving that night. Her mother didn't believe she'd actually go through with it alone and barely said goodbye. A casual dismissal she'd regret for years. The next morning, Yeonmi was gone. Panic set in. Had she drowned? Been captured? Days passed with no word. Then, under her pillow, Yeonmi found a note. "Go find this lady. She will bring you to China." An address for a broker. Driven by desperate need to find Yeonmi, Yeonmi and her mother went to that address. A plan formed. Not to escape forever. Just to cross the river. Find Yeonmi. Maybe come back. They were told it could happen that very night. In a moment of sheer will, 13-year-old Yeonmi grabbed her mother's hands and refused to let go. "We must go, Uma," she pleaded. "There may never be another chance." She wouldn't even let her mother go back to say goodbye to her father, knowing he'd stop them. And so, on that cold, black night of March 31st, 2007, Yeonmi and her mother found themselves scrambling down that frozen riverbank. They were guided by a young smuggler who'd bribed some guards. Just as they started down, a soldier spotted them. "Go back," he shouted. Their guide ran down and spoke in hushed tones. Another bribe. "Hurry," he urged, and they ran. They scrambled across melting ice, hearts pounding, until they reached the Chinese side. Yeonmi turned for one last look at her home. The power was out, as usual. All she saw was a black, lifeless horizon. They'd made it. They were in China. But their journey into darkness was only just beginning. They were met not by Yeonmi, but by a bald, middle-aged Chinese man, a human trafficker. He was their broker. In the darkness, beside a small shack, he pulled Yeonmi's mother aside. Yeonmi heard her pleading, "No, no." She didn't understand what was happening, but she knew something was terribly wrong. The broker had seen Yeonmi and wanted her. To protect her 13-year-old daughter, her mother made an unthinkable sacrifice. "Take me instead," she said, and in the dirt behind that shack, he raped her. This was their welcome to the free world. They soon learned the horrifying truth. They hadn't been rescued, they'd been sold. The North Korean broker had sold them to this Chinese trafficker. Her mother went for the equivalent of about $65. Yeonmi, a child, for about $260. Their price would go up each time they were passed along the chain. They were caught in a brutal market driven by China's one-child policy, which had created a massive gender imbalance and shortage of women in rural areas. Desperate men would pay thousands for a North Korean bride who had no rights, no papers, no legal recourse. Yeonmi and her mother were separated. Her mother was sold to a farmer in a remote village. And Yeonmi, at 13, came under the control of the top broker in the network, a man named Hongwei. He was a gangster, ruthless, and he wanted to keep her for himself. He locked her in his apartment, but she fought back with a ferocity born of pure terror. She kicked, she bit, she screamed. Finally, she grabbed a knife, held it to her own throat, and stood on the balcony, ready to jump. She would die before she let him take her. Seeing her resolve, he changed tactics. He made her a deal with the devil. If she would agree to be his little wife, his mistress, he'd use his network to find her family. He'd buy her mother back. He'd smuggle her father out of North Korea. He'd help find Yeonmi. What choice did she have? Die selfishly or sacrifice herself to save her family? She accepted. That night, she says, was when she truly left her body. She watched from a distance as this man took what was left of her childhood. It was a business transaction, she told herself. Not rape. It was the only way she could survive the memory. She became numb, a ghost, with only one purpose burning inside: bring her family back together. She became an accomplice in Hongwei's business. Barely a teenager herself, she was forced to translate for him, to clean up the new North Korean women he trafficked, to persuade them to accept their fate, to lie to the Chinese farmers who bought them. It was soul-crushing. But Hongwei, in his own barbaric way, kept his word. A few months later, he bought her mother back. The reunion was a flash of light in the darkness. Her mother had no idea what had happened to Yeonmi, and when she saw her, she hardly recognized the made-up, hardened girl before her. Then they set about rescuing her father. In August 2007, they got a smuggled Chinese cell phone to him in Hyesan. Yeonmi called him from the balcony of their old apartment. "Abuji, it's Yeonmi," she said. "We're okay." Hearing his voice after so many months was overwhelming. He'd been searching for them, consumed with worry and grief. "I'll bring you to China," she promised. On October 4th, 2007, her 14th birthday, her father arrived in China. The family was together again, minus Yeonmi, but their joy was short-lived. Her father was desperately ill. They took him to a Chinese hospital, risking everything. The diagnosis was devastating: advanced colon cancer. It had spread everywhere. He had, at most, a few months. He died in January 2008. He was only 45. Because he was illegal, there could be no official burial. In the middle of the night, Yeonmi and her mother, with help, took his body to a secret crematorium. She remembers scooping his still-hot ashes and bone fragments into a box with her bare hands, just to feel his weight one last time. They buried him on a small, lonely mountain overlooking a river, because he'd always loved sunshine and water. After her father's death, Hongwei's world crumbled. He became a gambling addict, losing everything, and his behavior grew more violent and erratic. Once again, Yeonmi and her mother were starving. In a moment of ultimate desperation, her mother begged Yeonmi to sell her again. "I'm just a burden to you here," she said. And so Yeonmi did. She found a kind family, sold her mother for about $2,850, and was alone again. But a fire had been lit inside her. She wouldn't accept this life. She knew she had to escape, not just from Hongwei, but from China itself. She heard whispers of another way out, a path to South Korea. It involved Christian missionaries and a perilous trek across another border. She and her mother, whom she managed to stay in touch with, decided to risk it. Through a network of underground shelters run by missionaries, they made their way to the edge of the Gobi Desert, on the border of Mongolia. In the dead of winter 2009, with temperatures plunging far below zero, their small group of defectors set out on foot into the vast darkness. "If you get lost," their guide said, "just look up and find the star. That will be north." For one endless, freezing night, they walked, following the stars to freedom. They crawled under barbed wire, hid from patrol lights, and nearly froze to death. Yeonmi thought she'd die out there, forgotten. But just as the sun rose, they stumbled through the final fence. They were in Mongolia. They'd made it. It was March 4th. Her father's birthday. Their ordeal wasn't over. Mongolian soldiers captured them and threatened to send them back to China, which would mean death. In a final act of defiance, Yeonmi and the other women prepared to take their own lives rather than go back. Their desperation moved the soldiers, who finally relented and took them to a detention center. After weeks of uncertainty, they were handed over to South Korean officials. In April 2009, 2 years after escaping North Korea, Yeonmi Park and her mother boarded a plane for Seoul. Stepping off that plane was like landing on another planet. The lights, the cleanliness, the sheer abundance was overwhelming. After interrogation and a 3-month resettlement program, they were finally released into South Korean society. She was free, but she quickly learned that freedom isn't a destination, it's a struggle. She was 15 with the education of a second grader. She was haunted by nightmares, plagued by trauma, and faced a new kind of cruelty, the prejudice and indifference of a society that saw her as strange and backward. Kids mocked her accent. A man at an internet cafe called her a foreigner and kicked her out. She felt so lost, she hid in their tiny government apartment for a month, afraid to go outside. But the same spirit that drove her across a frozen river and a barren desert wouldn't let her give up. She remembered her father's wish for her to get an education. She threw herself into studies with ferocious hunger. She read everything she could get her hands on, devouring books like she once dreamed of devouring bread. World history. Abraham Lincoln. Democracy. She discovered George Orwell's Animal Farm and felt, for the first time, that someone understood the absurdity and horror of the world she came from. Reading gave her more than knowledge. It gave her a language for her own experience. It taught her what it meant to be human. She was determined to prove everyone wrong. In just 2 years, she crammed in 12 years of education, earning her high school equivalency diploma. She was accepted into Dongguk University, one of South Korea's top schools, to study criminal justice. All this time, the search for Yeonmi never stopped. Yeonmi agreed to appear on a South Korean television show featuring North Korean defectors, hoping if her sister were alive in China she might see it. Then, in November 2013, merely 7 years after Yeonmi vanished, the miracle happened. Her mother called, hysterical, "Yeonmi, your sister! I've found your sister!" Yeonmi had made it out of China on her own, through Southeast Asia. She was in South Korea, at the same intelligence center where they'd been processed. Soon after, the three of them were reunited. Her mother, Yeonmi, and Yeonmi. A family shattered by tyranny, brutality, and loss was finally together again. When you finish a book like In Order to Live, it's hard to just close it and move on. It changes you. It rearranges the way you see the world. On the surface, it's about a place that seems impossibly foreign and cruel. But look deeper, and it's about things that are universal to all of us. The first and maybe most powerful lesson is about the nature of freedom. We often think of freedom as something grand and political, the right to vote, the right to speak. But for Yeonmi, in the beginning, freedom was far more elemental. It was freedom from hunger, freedom from fear, freedom to not have to whisper. Her story reminds us that the great freedoms we cherish are built on a foundation of smaller, more fundamental ones we often take for granted. The freedom to walk down the street without fear, to choose what you want to eat, to have an opinion and speak it aloud. These aren't small things, they're everything. Her journey also teaches us something profound about resilience. It's one thing to survive a physical ordeal, to cross a desert, to endure starvation. It's another thing entirely to survive the destruction of your soul, and then find a way to build it back, piece by piece. Yeonmi wasn't just a victim of a brutal regime. She was forced to become a participant in a brutal system in China to save her family. She had to carry the weight of choices no child should ever make. And yet she didn't allow that darkness to extinguish her. She found a path back to herself through knowledge, through an insatiable hunger to learn and understand the world that had been hidden from her. It's powerful proof that the mind, once freed, is the most powerful tool for healing the heart. And finally, her story is a powerful reminder of the weight of a single voice. For years, she hid her past, ashamed of what she'd been through and what she'd done. She tried to erase her North Korean identity and become someone else. But she eventually realized that her story, the full, painful, complicated truth, wasn't a source of shame, but a source of power. It was the one thing she possessed that could shine a light on the suffering of millions still trapped in darkness. In choosing to speak, she wasn't just telling her own story. She was giving voice to the voiceless. So what can we take from this? It's easy to feel helpless in the face of such immense suffering. But Yeonmi's life shows us we're not. The first step is simply to listen, to bear witness, to refuse to look away. And the second is to appreciate, with newfound gratitude, the freedoms we have. Today maybe you can take a moment to do something impossible for millions in North Korea. Read a book of your own choosing. Have a conversation where you speak your mind freely. Look up at the stars, and know you're free to follow them wherever you wish. These simple acts are miracles. Yeonmi Park risked her life for them. The least we can do is not take them for granted. That was a summary of In Order to Live by Yeonmi Park. We've touched on the major points of her incredible journey today, but I need to be honest with you. A summary can only give you the outline of a story this powerful. The real impact comes from experiencing it yourself. It's in the quiet, devastating details of her childhood, the raw terror of her escapes, and the profound reflections on what it means to rebuild a life from nothing. This summary is here to help you see if this story is one you need to hear. If anything we've discussed today has moved you or made you think, I truly encourage you to pick up a copy of the book. Reading it isn't just about learning facts. It's an experience that will challenge you, humble you, and ultimately, I think, inspire you. The link to the book is in the description below. Also, if you found this journey valuable, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. That way, you won't miss our next exploration into another transformative book that shaped the minds of leaders and thinkers around the world. Let's continue to learn and grow together.